It all began with a single bubble. Just one. Floating lazily over the edge of my pool, catching the sunlight like a tiny, iridescent globe. I stared at it, confused. Then another appeared. And another. Within minutes, my pool was a frothy, bubbling cauldron, foam spilling over the edges and creeping across the deck like some kind of alien invasion. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what was happening. My first thought was that I'd messed up the chemicals. Maybe I'd added too much chlorine or something. But as the foam grew thicker, cascading onto the lawn, I knew this wasn't a simple chemical imbalance. This was sabotage. And then I saw her. Linda, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, the tyrant of the HOA. She was standing at the edge of my property, her arms crossed, a smug grin plastered across her face. In her hand was an empty container of industrial-strength detergent. She'd done this. She'd turned my pool into a bubble bath. My blood boiled. Linda had been a thorn in my side for months. Ever since I moved into the neighborhood, she'd been on my case about every little thing. My grass was too long. My mailbox was the wrong color. My patio furniture didn't match the aesthetic of the community. And now this. This was personal. I clenched my fists, my jaw tightening so hard I thought my teeth might crack. Linda had crossed a line. She'd invaded my property, destroyed my pool. And for what? Because I refused to bow to her ridiculous rules? Because I dared to live my life without her approval? The doorbell rang, pulling me from my rage-fueled thoughts. It was my best friend, Chris. He took one look at the foamy disaster in my backyard and burst out laughing. "Dude," he wheezed, clutching his stomach. "Did you turn your pool into a bubble machine? This is insane." I glared at him, then thrust my phone into his hands. "Look at this." Chris's laughter died as he watched the security footage of Linda dumping the detergent into my pool. His expression shifted from amusement to disbelief. She actually did this? What the hell is wrong with her? "I don't know," I said through gritted teeth. "But I'm not letting her get away with it." Chris's eyes lit up with mischief. "Oh, this is gonna be good. What's the plan?" I didn't have a plan. Not yet. But I knew one thing. Linda had declared war. And I was going to fight back. The next morning, the neighborhood was abuzz with gossip. Linda's little stunt had turned my pool into a local landmark. Kids were daring each other to touch the foam, while adults whispered behind their hands, casting furtive glances in my direction. Linda, of course, was nowhere to be seen. She was probably holed up in her mansion, basking in the chaos she'd created. But I wasn't about to let her off the hook that easily. Chris and I spent the day plotting. We couldn't just retaliate. We had to outsmart her. Linda was cunning, manipulative, and had the entire HOA wrapped around her finger. If we were going to take her down, we had to play the long game. Our first move was subtle. We started spreading rumors. Nothing too obvious, just little whispers here and there. "Did you hear about Linda's illegal sprinkler system? They say she's been stealing water from the city for years. Oh, and have you seen the way she treats the landscapers? She's been underpaying them for months." The rumors spread like wildfire. By the end of the week, the entire neighborhood was talking. Linda's perfect facade was starting to crack. But we weren't done yet. The next phase of our plan was more direct. We waited until the dead of night, when the neighborhood was silent and the streets were empty. Then, with surgical precision, we executed our revenge. Chris had come up with the idea. "If Linda wants to play dirty, we'll play dirtier," he'd said with a grin. "Let's see how she likes it when her precious lawn is ruined." We didn't just drain my pool onto her lawn. Oh no, that would have been too easy. Instead, we redirected the water flow so that it seeped into her prized flower beds, the ones she'd spent years cultivating. The same flower beds that had won her the Best Lawn award 5 years in a row. As the water trickled out of my pool and into Linda's yard, I felt a surge of satisfaction. This wasn't just revenge, it was justice. Linda had brought this on herself. The next morning, the neighborhood woke up to chaos. Linda's lawn was a disaster. The soapy water had soaked deep into the soil, killing her precious flowers and turning her once pristine grass into a soggy, foamy mess. The foam had spread beyond her property, creeping onto the sidewalks and into the yards of her neighbors. Kids were jumping in it, laughing and screaming like it was a winter wonderland. Linda was furious. She stormed out of her house, her face red with rage, and immediately zeroed in on me. "You!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. This is your doing. You've destroyed my lawn. I put on my best innocent face. Me? Linda, I have no idea what you're talking about. I woke up just like everyone else. Maybe it's karma. Her face turned an even deeper shade of red. Karma? Karma. This is vandalism. I'm calling the police. But when the police arrived, they didn't see it that way. Ma'am, one of the officers said, trying to keep a straight face, there's no law against draining a pool. If the water ended up on your property, that's just bad luck. Linda was apoplectic. She ranted and raved, demanding that I be arrested, but the officers weren't HOA-ing it. They took one look at the soapy mess and left, shaking their heads. But the real Tory came later that day. Chris had been digging into Linda's past, and what he found was explosive. It turned out that Linda had been illegally diverting city water into her irrigation system for years. She'd bypassed the meters, racking up thousands of dollars in unpaid fees. And that wasn't all. She'd been using her position in the HOA to cover up her crimes, bullying anyone who dared to question her. When Chris presented the evidence to the city inspector, Linda's world came crashing down. The inspector arrived with a team from the water department, and within minutes, they found the illegal connection. Pipes hidden beneath Linda's flower beds, rerouted straight from a main city line. It was undeniable proof of her crimes. Linda tried to deny it, of course. She claimed ignorance, blamed her late husband, even accused the previous homeowner. But the evidence was overwhelming. The city officials weren't buying her excuses. Ma'am, the inspector said, his voice cold and stern, you've been flagged for unauthorized water use for nearly a decade. That's tens of thousands of dollars in unpaid fees, not to mention potential fines. This is going to require legal action. Linda's face went pale. Legal action? Fines? Charges? This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. This was serious. The neighborhood watched in stunned silence as Linda's empire crumbled around her. The woman who had terrorized them for years, who had fined them for every little infraction, who had ruled with an iron fist, was finally getting what she deserved. By the end of the day, Linda had been stripped of her position in the HOA. The neighborhood held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove her. She was fined an astronomical amount, and the city was considering pressing charges. As the sun set, Chris and I sat on my porch, beers in hand, watching the last of the city officials drive away. The foam had finally started to dissipate, but the damage was done. Linda's once perfect lawn was a patchy, soap-stained mess. Well, Chris said, taking a long sip of his beer, that was an eventful day. I chuckled, stretching out my legs. Yeah, think she learned her lesson? Chris snorted. Doubt it. But at least she won't be bossing anyone around anymore. I exhaled, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over me. For the first time in a long time, the neighborhood felt lighter. The reign of Linda was over. Then, as if the universe wanted to give me one final gift, I spotted something across the street. Linda, standing in the middle of her destroyed lawn, her arms crossed, glaring at the sudsy remains of her once perfect world. I lifted my beer in a silent toast. To karma. Chris clinked his bottle against mine. And to the best pool revenge in history. The calm after the storm didn't last long. Just when I thought life in the neighborhood would return to normal, a new wave of chaos hit. This time, it wasn't Linda who stirred the pot, it was her legacy. A week after Linda's dramatic downfall, the HOA held an emergency meeting to elect a new president. The candidates were a mix of longtime residents and newcomers, all vying for the position with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Chris, ever the instigator, suggested I run for the role. You? I laughed, nearly spitting out my coffee. Me? The guy who turned the neighborhood into a bubble bath? No way. Chris shrugged. Why not? You're basically a hero now. People love you. And besides, someone's got to keep the peace. You think anyone else is going to do a better job? I wasn't so sure. The last thing I wanted was to be responsible for enforcing rules I didn't even agree with. But Chris had a point. The neighborhood needed a leader who wasn't power-hungry or obsessed with micromanaging everyone's lives. Maybe I could be that person. The election was held in the community center, the same place where Linda had once held court like a suburban dictator. The room was packed, buzzing with nervous energy. People were eager for change, but they were also wary. Linda's reign had left a bitter taste in everyone's mouth. The candidates gave their speeches, each promising to bring a new era of fairness and transparency to the HOA. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. "Look," I said, standing at the front of the room. "I'm not here to tell you what color your mailbox should be or how short your grass needs to be. I'm here to make sure this neighborhood is a place where we can all live without someone breathing down our necks. No more fines for petty stuff. No more power trips. Just respect. That's all I'm asking for." The room erupted in applause. Even Chris, who was sitting in the back, gave me a thumbs up. When the votes were counted, I won by a landslide. At first, things went smoothly. The neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief as I dismantled Linda's most oppressive rules. Grass could grow a little longer. Mailboxes could be any color. Patio furniture no longer had to match some arbitrary aesthetic. People started to relax, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like a community rather than a prison. But not everyone was happy. A small group of residents, led by a man named Greg, began to grumble. Greg had been one of Linda's most loyal supporters, and he wasn't thrilled about the changes. He started spreading rumors, claiming that I was too lenient and that the neighborhood was going to fall apart without strict rules. "This is chaos," Greg said during one HOA meeting, his voice dripping with disdain. "People are letting their lawns go wild. There's no order anymore. We need structure." I tried to reason with him. "Greg, the neighborhood isn't falling apart. People are just enjoying their freedom. Isn't that what we wanted?" But Greg wasn't HOA-ing it. He started rallying support, forming a faction of residents who missed the good old days of Linda's rule. It wasn't long before the neighborhood was divided into two camps: those who supported my relaxed approach and those who wanted a return to strict enforcement. The tension came to a head one Saturday morning. I was out for a run when I noticed a group of people gathered in the park. As I got closer, I realized it was Greg and his followers, holding signs that read, "Bring back order," and "No more chaos." Chris was there too, standing on the sidelines with a bemused expression. "Looks like Greg's starting a revolution," he said as I approached. I sighed. "Great. Just what we need." Greg spotted me and immediately marched over, his face red with indignation. "This is your fault," he said, jabbing a finger in my chest. "You've turned this neighborhood into a free-for-all. People are doing whatever they want, and it's a disaster." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Greg, people are just levying their lives. They're not hurting anyone. What's the problem?" "The problem," Greg spat, "is that without rules, this place is going to fall apart. We need structure. We need discipline. We need someone who's not afraid to enforce the rules." Before I could respond, Chris stepped in. "Oh, come on, Greg. You're just mad because you can't boss people around anymore. Admit, you missed the power." Greg's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "This isn't about power. This is about maintaining standards." The argument escalated, drawing a crowd. People started taking sides, shouting over each other. It was chaos. That night, I called an emergency HOA meeting. The room was packed, the tension palpable. Greg and his supporters sat on one side, arms crossed, while the rest of the neighborhood sat on the other, looking anxious. "Look," I said, standing at the front of the room. "I know there's been a lot of tension lately. Some of you want more freedom, and some of you want more structure. But the truth is, we're all part of the same community. We need to find a way to coexist." Greg stood up, his face red. "Coexist? How can we coexist when people are letting their lawns go wild and painting their houses ridiculous colors? This isn't coexistence, it's anarchy." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Greg, I get it. You want order. But not everyone wants to live in a neighborhood where every little thing is controlled. We need to find a balance." The room erupted in murmurs. People started arguing, shouting over each other. It was clear that the divide was too deep to bridge with words alone. The next morning, I woke up to a surprise. Someone had TP'd Greg's house. The trees were draped in toilet paper, and his lawn was covered in plastic forks. It was a juvenile prank, but it sent a clear message. Greg's push for stricter rules wasn't popular. Greg was furious. He stormed over to my house, demanding that I do something about it. "This is your fault," he shouted. "If you had enforced the rules, this never would have happened." I sighed. "Greg, I can't control what people do. But maybe if you stopped trying to control everyone, they'd stop rebelling. Greg glared at me, his face red with rage. This isn't over, he said before storming off. The prank turned out to be the tipping point. Over the next few days, more and more residents started speaking out against Greg's faction. They were tired of the constant bickering and wanted to move on. Even some of Greg's former supporters began to waver. At the next HOA meeting, I proposed a compromise. How about we keep the basic rule: no trash in the yards, no loud noises after 10 p.m., but let people have some freedom when it comes to their homes. No more fines for grass length or mailbox colors. Let's focus on the things that actually matter. The room erupted in applause. Even Greg, though clearly unhappy, couldn't argue with the overwhelming support for the compromise. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood began to heal. The tension eased, and people started to relax. Greg kept to himself, his revolution fizzling out. The prank stopped, and life returned to normal. As for me, I learned that being in charge wasn't as easy as I thought. But it was worth it. The neighborhood was finally a place where people could live without fear of being fined for every little thing. And that, more than anything, made it all worthwhile. Chris and I still sat on my porch most evenings, beers in hand, watching the sunset. Sometimes we'd laugh about the bubble war and the chaos that followed. Other times, we'd just sit in silence, enjoying the peace. And if I ever saw another bubble, well, let's just say I'd be ready. But for now, I was content to let the neighborhood breathe. After all, we'd earned it. Just when I thought the neighborhood had finally found its equilibrium, a new storm brewed on the horizon. This time, it wasn't about rules or power struggles, it was about something far more personal: revenge. Greg, still bitter about his failed revolution, had been quietly plotting. He hadn't forgiven me for dismantling Linda's regime, and he certainly hadn't forgiven the neighborhood for rejecting his Showdown of order. His resentment festered, and it wasn't long before he found a way to strike back. It started with small things. A few residents reported that their trash cans had been knocked over in the middle of the night. Someone's garden gnome went missing, only to reappear in the middle of the park with a sign that read, "Free at last." At first, I dismissed it as harmless pranks. But then things escalated. One morning, I woke up to find my car covered in Showdown cream. The words, HOA traitor, were scrawled across the windshield in bold, foamy letters. Chris, who had come over for coffee, burst out laughing when he saw it. "Looks like Greg's not done with you," he said, snapping a picture with his phone. I sighed, grabbing a hose to wash off the mess. Yeah, well, he's gonna have to do better than this if he wants to get under my skin. But Greg wasn't done. Over the next few days, more incidents occurred. Someone's mailbox was spray-painted bright pink. Another resident's lawn was covered in plastic flamingos. The pranks were juvenile, but they were effective. The neighborhood was on edge, and people were starting to point fingers. At the next HOA meeting, the tension was palpable. Residents were angry, demanding answers. Greg sat in the back, a smug grin on his face, clearly enjoying the chaos. "This has to stop," one resident shouted, slamming her fist on the table. "We can't live like this." I held up my hands, trying to calm the room. "I know this is frustrating, but we need to stay calm. We'll figure this out." Greg stood up, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, sure. Because you've done such a great job so far. Maybe if you hadn't dismantled the rules, none of this would be happening." The room erupted in murmurs. People were dead, some siding with Greg, others defending me. It was clear that the neighborhood was on the brink of another meltdown. That night, Chris and I decided to take matters into our own hands. We set up a surveillance system, determined to catch the culprit in the act. We didn't have to wait long. Around midnight, we saw a shadowy figure sneaking through the neighborhood, carrying a can of spray paint. Chris and I exchanged a glance, then quietly followed. The figure stopped in front of a house, raised the can, and began to spray. We flipped on our flashlights, catching Greg red-handed. He froze, the can of paint still in his hand, his face a mix of shock and guilt. "Gotcha," Chris said, grinning. The next morning, we called an emergency HOA meeting. The room was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Greg sat in the corner, his face pale, avoiding eye contact. I stood at the front of the room, holding up the can of spray paint we'd confiscated. "Last night, we caught someone vandalizing property in our neighborhood. That someone is Greg." The room erupted in gasps. Greg stood up, his face red with anger. This is a setup. You're just trying to frame me because you don't like me. Chris stepped forward, holding up his phone. We've got VY Deo EVY Denke. Want to see it? Greg's face fell. He sank back into his chair, defeated. The fallout was swift. Greg was fined for the damages and banned from holding any position in the HOA. His supporters, realizing they'd been backing the wrong horse, quickly distanced themselves from him. The neighborhood, once again, breathed a collective sigh of relief. In the months that followed, the neighborhood truly began to heal. The pranks stopped, and the tension faded. People started to trust each other again, and the sense of community grew stronger. As for me, I continued to lead the HOA, but with a lighter touch. We kept the basic rule: no trash in the yards, no loud noises after 10 p.m., but let people have the freedom to express themselves. The neighborhood became a place where people could live without fear of being fined for every little thing. Chris and I still sat on my porch most evenings, beers in hand, watching the sunset. Sometimes we'd laugh about the bubble war and the chaos that followed. Other times, we'd just sit in silence, enjoying the peace. And if I ever saw another bubble, well, let's just say I'd be ready. But for now, I was content to let the neighborhood breathe. After all, we'd earned it. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.